Welcome to this old video series from Oak Tree Community Church in South Bend, Indiana. We are working our way through the book of 2 Samuel, and we are past the halfway point.
We are.
And headed
Down. That's a good way to put it.
in several different ways. Last time we had some ups and downs. In David's life, we're still going to see some ups and downs.
Yeah. Like the rest of his life.
The rest of the book, the rest of his life.
Yeah. So we're going to be in chapters 14 through part of chapter 18, reading this week.
Just to keep things interesting.
Yeah, mix it up. Don't stop in the middle of a chapter. But, it's where it breaks, and, you can only read so much every day.
Yeah, right.
So last week, David finally consolidated power. So he is now king. He was nice to Jonathan's son, which was a promise leading back to what he gave to Saul. So everything's kind of wrapped up now, and everything's perfect.
Seems to be.
Yep.
End of story. Thanks for coming.
Yeah. So then David commits adultery.
Yeah.
And this was a planned event. It wasn't spontaneous, and David went so far as to even have the husband of Bathsheba killed.
Yeah.
In a war. And people pulled back. He stayed there. He died. And as you brought out last week, so everybody focuses that David committed adultery. He committed murder too.
Yeah.
And it's like, so of course God wasn't happy with him.
Yeah.
And God said a number of things to him, and one of the things was the sword will never leave your house.
Yeah.
So we know that there's going to be trouble, and that trouble started right away last week. One of David's sons, a son and daughter. Another stepson, like the stepdaughter, ended up raping her, and then the son of the daughter who was raped ended up killing the other son, their half brother, and these are all David's sons in here. And then he went into hiding, and his name is Absalom, and we'll see him.
Yeah, he becomes a major player in this section coming up here. So
So as we left last week, he's now in hiding, and. Joab, who also is a major player in here, I'm just going to call him the commander-in-chief.
Yeah,
he's a high-level guy.
Call him like the 5-star general or whatever. Yeah. He is in charge of David's army.
Yeah, also happens to be a relative, which is fine. But so he thought of a way to bring Absalom back, right? Because this kid has murdered, not a kid, right? Even though he's David's son.
Yeah.
And that's not
they
a
would
good
have been
thing.
Like cousins or something too. So like you said, I mean,
so it's a whole family event in there. So what he did was, one of the reasons he might have done this is because Absalom might have been heir.
Well, he was the firstborn son, so he would have been the natural,
the
natural heir, the natural replacement.
So now the heir to the nation of Israel, which is finally consolidated, it's finally got size, it's finally got his act together. He could have been looking forward to, hey, we gotta get the next guy here.
Yeah, I mean, so I think the term I was using last week was crown prince. Absalom is the crown prince. Right. I mean, he's the heir apparent.
Yeah. So he hired what they call a wise woman. I'm going to call her an actress.
An actress. That's really all she was.
Yeah. And it's a good reading. Read it all. I'm going to give you a very condensed version of it because it's all over the place. But this woman told David a story, and as she's telling him, you kind of reminded of the story Nathan told.
Yeah, I mean, David. it's like
and David just is set up again for it.
He's not figuring out what's going on here.
So this woman says, I had 2 sons. They got into a fight. One killed the other one. The one still living had to go in hiding, and he's my son. I love him. I want to be with him. He's the heir. He needs to take care of me. And just piling it on. Yep. And David's, I will do everything in my power to get him back. And then just like with Nathan, she spins it around and says, I'm talking about you.
Yeah, why won't you let Absalom back?
Right. And he stops dead, and he immediately knows who set her up.
Yeah, he's like, did Joab tell you to say all this?
And then she's like, yes. And
he's
not
really
mad.
Actually, yeah. That was actually really cool. She's like, because he said, answer me honestly. She's like, whatever.
Yeah.
And again, I've said this multiple times on these videos, over the years, but these are people, right? We read some of this stuff, and we're like, wow, it's like real life. Well, I mean, this is real life.
Stuff.
This is exactly so many things we could see happening today, Right.
So in the end, Absalom was able to return David refused to see him.
Yeah.
So Avalon, he wanted to talk to somebody, and nobody was answering his messages. So he ended up. So of course, the obvious thing to do is to set Joab's field on fire, and that got Joab's attention. But then they were finally able to talk.
Yeah, but it was like 2 years.
Yeah,
I mean, David would not see Absalom for 2 years.
Well, he was in hiding for 2 years, so an additional 2 years once he was back.
I thought it was when he came back. It was 2 years.
All right, so chapter 15. So Absalom, he was in hiding for 2 years, and it seemed to affect him poorly. And I think also when he came back, his dad refuses to speak to him. He wanted to get some revenge. So it seems like he had it out. Well, didn't seem. He had it out for David.
Yeah.
And so he hatched a plan that took 4 years to complete. So this is premeditated.
Oh, absolutely. No question.
So his plan was to win the loyalty of the citizens of Israel. So he inserted himself as people were coming to talk to the king, either with lawsuits or with problems that they had, and he would insert himself in the middle of it.
Yeah, it was, and it's so funny. He would stand there at the gate, and he's like, "Don't you wish you had some kind of representation with the king?"
Yeah,
I wonder who could do that for you.
It's a TV commercial. Who are you gonna call? Call Absalom.
You may be entitled to compensation.
Yeah. I wonder if he took some money for his mediation. So he placed himself as a mediator.
Yeah.
And I know the king.
Yeah.
I can get you favorable results.
Yeah.
Things. And so then when he felt he had enough support of the people, he went to the king and said, "Hey, I want to go back to Hebron." And if you remember, that's the place where the capital was before David moved to Jerusalem.
Yeah, and he was there for like 7 years before he moved to Jerusalem, right? So he loved the place,
Yep. And he wanted to fulfill a vow. So he got approval from David, and as he was leaving, he kind of asked 200 men to come with him. It doesn't seem like the men actually knew what was going on, but they followed him anyways.
Yep.
I mean, like you said, the crown prince. You're
yeah.
going to follow the crown prince. Mm-hmm. And then he sent word, when you hear the horn sound in Hebron, you know that Absalom has become king.
Yeah.
Right? He's setting up a takeover.
Uh-huh.
And it's like, this will never work. And it came very close to working.
And it did, because David, for some reason, and I still don't understand his thinking exactly, David hears that Absalom has basically set himself up as king in Hebron.
Right.
And instead of smacking him down and saying, "What in the world are you doing?" he takes off for the hills like it's David and Saul all over again.
Right. Yeah. Plus Jerusalem, which he specifically picked because it was very defensible.
Yeah, it's a fortress. Yeah. He runs out of there and he leaves.
Yeah. So even a couple of David's advisors went on Absalom's side too.
Yeah.
So maybe he was worried that he didn't know who to trust or who not to trust.
Probably.
That's about the only thing I can come up with.
Yeah, fortunately he did have a couple of trusted friends that he was able to say, "You know what, stay here."
Yeah.
And
really act as a spy.
Yeah, espionage a little bit, right? Report back. One of them, he said, give counsel, and hopefully give counsel that helps me, not him,
Right.
And so he was still
the
sort of
Messiah?
yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah.
There's going to be a bunch of names. He's going to have to say every single one of them.
And he still tried to make sure that he had his fingers in the inner workings while he was living in a cave again.
Yeah.
Which, obviously he never thought he was going to have to go through that again.
Right.
But
right, but he did. I mean, he did before, right? So he knew the game and how it was played,
which really will help.
Yeah, and also I think in chapter 16 we see that as he's leaving, he's doing exactly what you said to a number of people. Hey, I implore you, please stay behind. The best way you can help me is stay behind and feed me some information. I don't think he ever says that piece of it, but that was obviously the intent.
What's interesting here in verse 30, we're in chapter 16, verse 30, as David was going up the Mount of Olives. Now, if you're familiar with Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the Mount of Olives is right outside Jerusalem, and you're used to hearing Jesus walking up the Mount of Olives or whatever. And so it's sort of almost, it may be jarring to see David walking up the Mount of Olives. You're like, oh yeah, it's the same Jerusalem. It's the same thing. 1,000 years before Jesus did. You've got David doing this, and so you might find maybe a little jarring, maybe a little familiar as you see that in your reading this week.
Okay, so Mephibosheth. Do I have that right?
Mephibosheth. Yep.
All right.
Yep.
So he, his servant stayed.
Yep.
Right, and the servant left, but brought food to David.
Yeah.
And then he stayed with Absalom.
And he was the servant. Ziba was the guy who David had tapped to help make sure that he was able to take care of
right.
Jonathan's son.
Well, then, so David did a really interesting things. He also made what was it, Ziba?
Yeah.
The sole heir.
Yeah.
So to me, that was also okay. Now, you don't really care if this guy dies. You're gonna get his inheritance.
Yep.
So it would make him much more loyal to David too.
Right. Yep.
So he's definitely playing the political game.
Oh yeah, yeah. David's a warrior. He's a politician. He knows how to play the game. But as we saw last time, he doesn't know how to run his family.
Right.
All of these trouble
amazing.
this trouble is not political. The trouble is family that has bled over into the politics.
Right.
It's not really political trouble until the family gets involved.
Right. I was going to say, we see that today in politicians, right? We have good, strong politicians with lousy families.
Families are
A couple
disastrous.
weeks ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Something about that.
And sadly, we see the same thing in churches too.
Right.
Pastors and scandals and all this stuff. Everything looks good, but their families are disasters.
So David came upon another one of Saul's extended relatives, and Shimei.
Shimei.
Okay.
A-I.
So he was throwing insults and rocks at David, and cursed him for overthrowing Saul's reign.
Yeah.
So, one guy, obviously not happy.
He's still bitter over.
Yeah, exactly. Right, but not the guy who's going to overthrow David.
Yeah.
And I think David recognizes that, and David also is thinking about God at this time and treats him nicely when he easily could have had him killed.
Still made his promise to Saul that I'm not going to, unnecessarily, hurt your family. Yeah. So this guy's literally throwing rocks at David's head, and David's like, yeah I'll let you live.
Right.
Oh, man.
Okay, Hussein, so he does become Absalom's advisor, and he had advised David before, and then Absalom asked for a second counselor on what he should do, right? So Absalom's not a total idiot.
No.
He's coming into power. He really doesn't know what to do. He needs some counselors.
Yep.
This guy has been on David's side. Okay, that's okay. I'm going to ask another guy, too,
Yeah.
and see if they give me the same advice.
Yeah.
So, interestingly enough, the second guy was a great counselor, right? Like all of his advice was always right on the money.
He was a good counselor to David, and Absalom thought he would be a good counselor to him as well.
Yep. So, and what's his name?
Ahithophel.
Ahithophel. All right. So so he says, hey, give me 12,000 troops. I'll go attack David tonight. And I'll do my best to only kill David. So I'll bring back the 12,000 troops, and I'll bring back David's army. Yep. The idea was, hey, army, we get it. You sided with David. David's now dead. We're willing to. We're all Israel. Yep. Everybody can come back.
Yep.
And Absalom wanted a second opinion.
Yeah, thought that was good, but
yeah. So he asked this other guy who's loyal to David, though.
Yep.
And he said, even though that idea might work, it's a bad idea. Do you really want to do this? This guy's a warrior.
Don't you remember?
This guy lived in the caves.
Yeah, David's a warrior. He's back in territory that's familiar to him. Do you really think if Saul couldn't hunt him down and kill him that you're going to be able to do this? I'm not sure that that's probably the best plan.
Yeah, so
which is true.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not only wise, but it's also, he's not lying to him. It's true.
Yeah. So he gave his opinion on what to do next, and it sounded better, so Absalom went that route.
Yeah.
And then,
which gave Hushai the opportunity to say, "Hey, David,
David, get out of the cave. They're crossing a river." So the guy whose advice wasn't taken hanged himself.
Yeah, he's like, "Well, if you're not going to listen to me, I'm going to go kill myself," and he did it.
Yeah. Okay, I was waiting for more for a why.
Yeah.
So the only thing I could come up with was a why. Was he knew that Absalom wasn't going to win, and yet he sided with him. So he was going to be on the losing side, and he was going to lose his life anyways.
Yeah. Although,
I don't know.
I mean,
That's pretty.
David may or may not have, right? He was a friend. He was a trusted counselor.
It wasn't the Philistines are coming in. It was, it's Israel against Israel.
Yeah. So,
right.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah. Okay, so David assembles his army. He divides it into three, and he puts a third under Joab, a third under Joab's brother, and another third under Attila.
Not Attila.
I can't see.
Yeah, Ittai.
Ittai.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, another trusted friend.
Right. So David wants to go out with them, but he's convinced to stay behind.
Yeah, he's like, I'm going to help. I'm going to lead this army. And the three of them look at him and say, "Are you an idiot?" Right. I mean, what's going to happen is that everybody's going to be gunning towards you, no matter which one of us, and 1/3 of us is not enough to protect you.
Right. So we're dividing our army. Whichever third you go with, they're going to fight and figure out. And
they're going to ignore the rest of us. So they persuade, which was wise. Again, I mean, he has smart people around him. The king usually
goes out to fight.
Yeah.
Right. So now I think we're going to see a series where David is basically done fighting.
Yeah.
A little bit later, it says, the right arm of Israel.
Yeah.
You're worth 10,000
troops.
Yeah,
they call him the lamp of Israel.
Lamp,
if you get extinguished,
yeah, we're done.
Yeah. So it was wise, and he did stay back, and they were able to win.
So the one thing he tells his soldiers is deal gently with Absalom.
Yeah.
Which is really odd because we're at war here. And we have a war going on.
Yep.
And the war was caused by Absalom. So David's army of 20,000 soldiers, the battle's spread out, but a lot of people on there. And Absalom happens to come across David's men. He's riding. It's very strange what happens to him. He's riding a mule. Somehow he doesn't see a tree branch, and he doesn't get lifted up, but the tree branch catches him, and then donkey keeps going, and he's caught on this tree.
Well, it's his hair. His hair actually gets caught in the branches. Because he's got one of the things that we're told is the beautiful hair, right?
I knew it. Well, it was
the hair's coming.
It was
back.
one of those things that was brought out and not said, so it usually comes back to haunt you.
Yep. He had this long flowing mane of hair. So I went to like Fabio or some some of these guys, right? This long flowing mane of hair, and it gets caught in the tree branch, and the mule keeps going, and he's hanging there by his hair.
Which is very believable because it's so unbelievable,
right?
That it happened.
Yeah,
and. To me, this is not the funniest part either.
It's the second fun. How can something be better than that, right? Yeah. All right, so what's even better than that?
So this was related to Joab, and he said, "What are you doing? I would have given you 10 pieces of silver and a commemorative belt."
Like WWE.
So, which is like, what are you talking about? But to the soldier who would have made this kill, would have gotten some money and something to remember it by. But a commemorative
belt, right? So are you? I mean, it's like a Texas belt
buckle. This is the time
No, I mean it could have been a sash. It could have been a metal, something. But something I would have rewarded you big time had you done this.
Right. And the guy's like
in the net.
The guy's like
commemorative belt.
Dude, I didn't even look up other ones. The guy's like, dude, even if you were to give me 1,000 pieces of gold,
the king said,
exactly.
I'm not touching the guy.
Yeah. So Joab goes and kills Absalom, puts him in a pit, puts a bunch of stones over him, and showing him some respect from that aspect. And then everybody went home. That's the end of the war. Yeah, which it would have been the same way if David would have been killed.
Yep.
Right. So, and we'll see that part next week.
It's almost like chess, right? We took the king.
Yeah, he took the king.
Checkmate.
Doesn't everybody else on the board just kind of stops?
Yeah. Set up for next time.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really what happened.
Yeah.
And we're stopping in the middle of chapter 18. We're going to put a pause there until next week.
Yep.
But we end with Absalom's death, and there was a memorial. And just fun fact here in chapter 18, verse 18, it says, "And to this day it is known as Absalom's memorial," because this was written down later. And so whoever was writing this historical record,
so it's important to know not to the time we're reading it,
not to
the
today,
time it was written,
but the day it was written. Right to this day, it's maybe it is, maybe it's not over the course of history. But as of the time this was written, they could go literally. They could walk to that place and say, "This is where that event happened."
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Pretty cool.
So. Yeah, like Gary said, there's a lot of really interesting the detail. You're going to love reading about Absalom's hair. There's some really cool information in there about that, and some fun stuff. But this whole week's reading really comes under the sword will not leave your house, and this is still some of God's judgment on David's family for what David had done there in chapters 11 and 12. So. Don't forget that in the midst of reading all the details of this stuff. As you have questions and comments, as always, we'd love to hear those. Send those in to us. Subscribe and like and share this with everybody that you want to share this with. And we will pick back up here in the middle of chapter 18 next time. See you then.
Bye.